Hey everybody, it's Nelfie coming to you with a Frost guide. I'm not normally a Frost main, but I've done a lot of research into it and I haven't seen much in the way of videos for the different builds that Frost has, and so I wanted to go over a couple of them throughout the video. First thing I wanted to do is just go through the different talent builds the different talents for the different builds. And the first one I would go with is Bone Chilling, either Shimmer or Ice Flows, whichever you prefer. And then Incanter's Flow. And for single target, you can run a build with Frozen Touch, Unstable Magic, Frigid Winds, and Thermal Void. And if there's any cleave, then you would run with Splitting Ice. And if there's any AoE phases, such as like Scorpion or Spellblade, you can run Arctic Gale as well. I typically don't change talents off Splitting Ice because Splitting Ice increases the damage of your Ice Lance and your Icicles, and so even on single target it's not that bad, and I think Frozen Touch is kind of a little bit over hyped, I guess, and doesn't really perform super well. So this is probably the first build I would run with, and I'll go over that rotation after I do the other ones. The other one is the Glacial Spike build, which you run right here are the talents. So you run with Lonely Winter, Splitting Ice, Unstable Magic, and Glacial Spike. And with this build, it's going to be the best for single and two target cleave, maybe even if there's 3 targets or consistently 2. It's going to be the best spec. It's really potent with cleave like that. And this build seems to be a little less mobile due to not wanting to stack a lot of haste like the other builds do. But that's essentially what you would run for your cleave. And then another build that I prefer more than the other ones is Ray of Frost build. And you can either go with Thermal Void or Comet Storm on this. You can go with Comet Storm if you're running for an AoE encounter. It actually works really well with to drop Comet Storm and then either Pet Freeze, or you can Ice Nova it as well to shatter your Comet Storm. Or you can run with Thermal Void. I'm pretty sure this is what a lot of people would prefer to run this. And both the Ray of Frost builds and the Thermal Void build that I showed you at the beginning are going to favor haste and crit or the crit until you hit the soft cap at 33%, around there, and the closer you get to it, the less a sim's going to value it. So you're going to want to haste and crit for both of those builds, while Ray of Frost scales better with haste. As haste goes up, you get more ticks of Ray of Frost, and that's where a significant portion of your damage comes from. And with the Glacial Spike build, you're going to want to stack Mastery and Verse, and item level and your Paragon points are really important in the Glacial Spike build because it scales really well with item level and with the whatever you call these, artifact weapon points or Paragon points. And yeah, that's kind of a basic overview. The openers change a little bit for each one, and as I mentioned, the stats change a little bit for each one. But outside of that, there's a couple things that are just general rotation tips that I wanted to go over. A couple things that you want to do as a mage is whenever you get a Brain Freeze proc, you don't want to use it if you have any Ice Lances. So you want to dump your Ice Lances first, but when you have it, what you want to do is you want to Frostbolt, Brain Freeze, and then Ice Lance right after. And the procs have been delayed recently, so that if you have a Brain Freeze proc and you cast a Frostbolt and it procs another one, you won't hit. It won't think you already have a Brain Freeze proc and spend it. It'll delay it for a second so you can use that Brain Freeze and proc another one. And so that's just a couple things. And the reason you can Ice Lance after a Brain Freeze proc is because you can get the Shatter off of. You'll see the Brain Freeze proc, that Shatter. If you hit an Ice Lance within that, you'll get your Ice Lance as if you had a Fingers of Frost proc. And so that's why you do that. Another pretty common thing is when you're casting Ebon Bolt, you can hit Flurry immediately after it, and you can shatter your Ebon Bolt. Let's see, can I see that in the log? Ebon Bolt hit for, what, 1 million instead of probably what it hits for normally, maybe 800, 600. And so you can shatter your Ebon Bolt with your Flurry. And so those two things are things that you want to do regardless of which spec you're playing. And the same thing with Water Jet. If you cast Water Jet, you'll watch my cast go, and about 2/3 the way through it, if you proc your Water Jet right about now, then you'll get as many Fingers of Frost as you can out. I got 3 that time because I timed it perfectly. And so that's a goal there, is to get as many Fingers of Frost procs within your Water Jet. And so that's one thing. And another thing, I don't know if a lot of people knew this. I've run into people that don't know this. When you cast Frozen Orb, they changed it back to where your Blizzard is going to decrease the cooldown of your Frozen Orb. And so just as a quick thing, I'll show right here, and you'll see how Frozen Orb kind of ticks down quicker. And so that's just something to keep in mind, especially on AoE. It's going to be really important to keep that up. And this actually synergizes really well with Frostbomb, though people tend to not like Frostbomb that much. It synergizes really well if there's a lot of adds constantly, because you can get your Frozen Orb down really quick and keep it up, keep Frostbomb, and just spamming Ice Lances. So that's another thing. And as far as that, another thing just in terms of Comet Storm. Oh, let me cancel my pet. If you run Comet Storm, let's see, move that over here, then a way that you can shatter this is if you're going to cast it on here, you can hit Comet Storm and then immediately do a pet freeze instead of your Water Jet, and it'll shatter. And I'll show you how that works, like right here. And you'll see Comet Storm, I think the first one's hit for about 66, and then we got a crit. But that's the main goal when you run Comet Storm, is to be able to shatter that either with that, or you can, let's see, what do I have? You can do a Nova as well if you're in range of them, which isn't as common for Frost to be in melee AoE range, but you can Frost Nova them into Comet Storm as well. And on a lot of the adds, the pet freeze will proc Cephases as well. And that doesn't work always on bosses, but it works on a lot of the adds in Nighthold. So those are just a couple things to be aware of. Now I'll go into the rotations, and I'll start with the Thermal Void, since I'm assuming that's what most people want to see. And we go with Bone Chilling, summon your Water Elemental. And with this build, the way that you want to do your opener is you're going to want to Ebon Bolt, but before you don't want to shatter this first Ebon Bolt, because you want to use the Ice Lance proc that you get from it to extend your Icy Veins. And with this, let me just make sure I'm not wearing my Glacial Spike gear. Okay. With this, the goal is to keep up your Icy Veins as long as possible through Fingers of Frost, since it extends it by 2 seconds. And so you're going to want to cast your Ebon Bolt, and then you're going to Icy Veins, and then what is it called? The one that appears up here, your Brain Freeze proc, then you'll Ice Lance, and then after that you'll want to go into your Water Jet and then into your Frozen Orb. And so I'll demonstrate that for you right here. You would precast your Ebon Bolt, and then you would Icy Vein, Brain Freeze, Ice Lance, and then you would Pet Freeze right here, or Water Jet, into your Frozen Orb, and then you just go into your normal rotation here. And the goal is to keep up, the goal is to get good RNG actually, but that's harder to do than it is to say. If you're lucky and you get it, you can get it to right where your Ebon Bolt comes off cooldown. You can extend it a little farther, but I was able to get about 1 minute and 20 seconds. Maybe not 1 minute and 20 seconds worth, but 1 minute and 20 seconds into the cooldown of Icy Veins. So And then outside of that, you're just going to want to continue your normal rotation using Water Jet on cooldown. And then Frozen Orb as well, along with your Ebon Bolt. And it's good to pool a couple Fingers of Frost procs right before your Icy is coming up, and that way you're able to go in with a couple more charges to extend it a little further. So that's good. And so right around like maybe 10 seconds-ish is when I'd normally start pooling. So it's about to be coming up here soon, so, and you can use your Ebon Bolt before if you don't have a proc, which I do. So you're right here, and you can cast your Ice Lance, Brain Freeze, Ice Lance, Ebon Bolt, then into your Water Jet. And we can hope that we get lucky here. We'll see how. We're not doing too bad at this point. And then Water Jet's about to come off cooldown. So we'll get a couple more Fingers of Frost here, guaranteed. And Ebon Bolt's just barely. There we go. And we're 4 seconds off for Water Jet. Yeah, we just barely missed it. And if you can get to that Water Jet, you can usually make it to Frozen Orb again. The one change in the opener as well that I wanted to go over was if you have Vashir's Grasp or the gloves, legendary gloves, what you'll want to do is you'll want to icy when you start with Ebon Bolt and you have your Brain Freeze proc, you're going to want to Icy Veins, then Ice Lance, then Brain Freeze, then Ice Lance. So that's a major change in that. And then let's go over the next build here. Let's see. Next build I wanted to go over is the Glacial Spike build. And with this build, everybody thinks it's still the meme spec of 7-1. It's not still the meme spec. You essentially want to use everything like you would normally in a Thermal Void build, except for you're running Glacial Spike as well. And so with this, you're also going to want to be wearing a different gear set than you are for Thermal Void. With this, I have a lot of 66% mastery. I would probably change my enchants to versatility and not worry as much about haste, though you do want your crit to be up near the soft cap of 33%. And with this build, your opener is going to be essentially the same, except for you don't need to, you can shatter your opening Ebon Bolt, because you don't need to use the Thermal Void part of extending your Icy Veins, and so you can Ebon Bolt and shatter your Ebon Bolt with Brain Freeze, and then Ice Lance, and then Icy Veins, and go into Water Jet and Frozen Orb, just like you did with the Thermal Void build. And if at any time you get to 4 or 5 stacks of Icicles, then you'll Glacial Spike. And that's essentially how the opener changes, and I'll show you the opener and go through the rotation. And as far as AoE goes on this build, you're not going to want to Blizzard until you hit 4+ targets. And if you're going to AoE, you probably are better running another spec, because Glacial Spike is meant for 2-target cleave and single target. So to start out, you'd pre-pot and then Ebon Bolt into a Brain Freeze and then Ice Lance, oops, and then you would Icy Veins into a Water Jet, oh you don't Water Jet, hello, into your Frozen Orb, and then you'll hit your Glacial Spike up here. A lot of times I like to go into my Icy Veins with a Glacial Spike as well when we're in the middle of the rotation here. And the advantage to this build is you're really spamming a lot of you don't have your pet, and because of that, your ice lances are down a little bit. And with this build as well, you really want to be spending all your time casting your Frostbolt into Brain Freeze into Ice Lance procs, because that empowers your icicles, and because of that, you'll get better Glacial Spikes from that. And if you're lucky enough to time your Glacial Spikes to where they come up and land on 5, that's also spectacular. And a lot of people have talked about shattering your Glacial Spikes by casting Glacial Spike, then doing a Shimmer up, and after your Shimmer, you cast a Brain Freeze proc. And from my understanding, that's unreliable, and so it's not something you should be aiming to do. And as far as that, the rest of the rotation is pretty similar, just not very different than the Thermal Void, but a lot slower. And so right here, you'll see I get a Brain Freeze and then an Ice Lance, and then I'm going to Ebon Bolt and get another one right here, another Frostbolt for my Icicle. And then I'm going to Glacial Spike. Let's see, I don't know what mine are hitting for. They're not, yeah, that was about 3.2 million on that Glacial Spike. So you would have pumped out about 6.5 million damage on 2-target Glacial Spike there. So it really is a potent build. And so right here I go in with a Glacial Spike, so I can Icy Veins and then Glacial Spike here. And then let's see what we hit for there. 2.1 million non-crit. Yeah, it's about 2.3. So that's good. That's essentially the build. All the tricks in the build are essentially getting as many Brain Freeze procs in a row, and getting a Frostbolt, Brain Freeze, Ice Lance, and building up good Icicles that way, and getting lucky with your Frostbolts critting, and that'll stack up your Icicles and give you a really big Glacial Spike. And that's essentially the build. It goes a little slower with less haste. I find the Icy Flows works pretty well with this build, because you're casting a lot, and so you can just Icy Flows in the middle of it and continue moving. So that's the Glacial Spike build. And then now I want to go over the Ray of Frost build. This is one of my favorite ones, actually. And the reason I like this build is because I feel it's really versatile and still pumps out good single target damage, and has the option to go AoE damage without much change. And because of that, I really enjoy the build. And one thing I wanted to go over with this build as well is I'm not going to, maybe I could demonstrate both of them separately. There's a more difficult opener, I would say, for the Thermal Void, and it requires a lot more precise timing, and that is one of the downsides of this, is knowing the encounters really well. It's a really high skill cap playstyle, with Ray of Frost being a 10-second channel, and you're not running Incanter's Flow, you're running Rune of Power, so trying to stay in that. And then if you're AoEing the Comet Storm with the Pet Freeze and the Frost Nova, is a little higher skill cap as well than just casting Blizzard and Frost or Frozen Orb. And because of that, it's a little more difficult, and running with the Thermal Void build as well makes it even more difficult. Because of the way the opener is, you can't just open right into a Ray of Frost, because you want to dump your cooldowns. And I would suggest doing this even if you're running Comet Storm, but it's not as necessary. It is your cooldowns are going to have, they're going to take 10 seconds longer to get off cooldown if you don't use all these things on the opener. And the opener for this is going to be, you're going to Frostbolt into a Water Jet twice to get 2 Fingers of Frost procs. Then you're going to drop a Blizzard, a Rune of Power, and then you'll Frozen Orb, and you'll just spam Ice Lances until you're about 10 seconds into your into your Icy Veins because we don't want the Chill to the Core to fall off for our Ray of Frost, and then we'll cast another Rune of Power right into a Ray of Frost, and that'll finish up the last 10 seconds of our original 20-second cooldown, and then we'll go back into trying to keep it up with our other cooldowns that'll come back up with our Fingers of Frost. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to open and I'm going to go into a Frostbolt with a Water Jet. 1, 2, and then I'll Blizzard into Rune of Power, into Frozen Orb, into Icy Veins, and then I'll dump all of these charges. And then we'll see when we're about 10 seconds into this, you can see right there, Rune of Power, and then Ray of Frost. I did it a little bit late there, but you'll hold on to any other Fingers of Frost or Brain Freeze procs and just use them immediately afterwards. And then you'll Water Jet again, since that comes off cooldown perfectly. And then you can Ebon Bolt as well, since we didn't open with that. And so you don't get a lot of Icy Veins extension in this build right off the beginning, which is why I typically don't run this with Thermal Void, especially since there's a lot of AoE and Nighthold. And because of that, you're not going to be able to have it up for your next Ray of Frost. But during your next Ray of Frost, you'll have another Rune of Power up for that. And because you'll have a Rune of Power up for that, you'll wait till it comes off cooldown, and then for your third Ray of Frost, you'll have your second Icy Veins up, more than likely. Mine has 1 minute and 15 seconds left on it. Another thing you can do as well when you drop your Rune of Power is you can drop a Blizzard beforehand, and that gives you a little bit extra, possibly Fingers of Frost generators during that Ray of Frost, and it's just a good ability to have running while you're under Rune of Power and not anything else. And as you can see, our cooldown for Ray of Frost and Icy Veins is probably going to line up pretty nicely with our crits from Frostbolt. And our Rune of Power will sit on it for just a second, even though it's capped out right now. And then we'll have our Ray of Frost up for Icy Veins, and I also try to go into Icy Veins with a couple Fingers of Frost, if possible. Right now I got a Brain Freeze. Let's see if I can grab any more before I go into it. Nope. Oh, there we go. So we'll go into it like this. Water Jet, get 2 of those. Dump my Fingers of Frost procs. Oh, I forgot my Rune of Power. And then go into my Ray of Frost. And once again, I held that too long till about only 7 seconds left on that. And that's where the skill cap comes in, is knowing or having some type of weak aura that shows you well when the 10 seconds have passed up. And that's where the skill cap's going to be here if you're dropping all your cooldowns at the beginning. And whereas when you're running with your other build, when you're running with Comet Storm, am I out of combat? Come on. If you're running with Comet Storm, it's not as detrimental to open with Ray of Frost and then drop your cooldowns, and which is what a lot of people might do, unless you're trying to min-max to the bones, which I understand that because that's how I typically play. But let me cast some Frostbolts to get my Icy Veins back. But with this, the only difference is that you'll be shattering and trying to use your Comet Storm and Shatter within Rune of Power to get quite a bit of damage out. It works a lot better on AoEing and Mythic Plus than it does on single target. And so typically I wouldn't really even use it on single target, even if it's on cooldown, because if you're running the Comet Storm for a fight like Spellblade, Scorpion, something like if you were to run this on Botanist or any fights like that, you're going to just want to save the cooldowns for when you can hit multiple things all at the same time, rather than using it on single target. So let's see. Got about 20 seconds left on that, and then I'll drop combat again. Passive pet. Put him back on attack once I drop aggro. And then, alright, we will drop this, reset all the data, set him to attack, put Water Bolt back on. And another thing too is being aware of not using your Water Jet and to keep your freeze for when you're AoEing with Comet Storm. And so I'll use, I'll pretend like this is, who knows, Chromatic Anomaly. I don't know what time exactly the ads come out at, but I'll use an example, I guess. And so with this, the way the opener changes is you can do the same opener, which was the ideal one that I just showed you with Ray of Frost Thermal Void, except for it's not as perfectly important to get all your Ice Lances off after you cast Icy Veins, so you can cast Icy Veins a little sooner because of that. You can precast Ebon Bolt and then Rune of Power into a Brain Freeze Ice Lance after having clicked Icy Veins and go into Frozen Orb and Jet. So you can do that into 10 seconds worth. But I'm gonna do it the way that I would suggest you do it till maybe you get a hang of the build, and that's just going straight into, you would precast your Ebon Bolt on it, and then you're going to Flurry Ice Lance, Rune of Power, Icy Veins, Ray of Frost, and then after that you'll go into your Frozen Orb. So I'll show you that right here. You precast Ebon Bolt, Brain Freeze, that, oh, and then you would go like this. A lot of times you get Heroism at the beginning, which works out well. And then right after this, we're going to Frozen Orb. And then we're going to go from here. We're going to save our freeze, because I'm assuming that the ad will come out soon. Maybe we'll spend it, what the heck. Because on Chromatic Anomaly, we get a second, right? And then, let's say we swap ads here. And we get to the second big ad. We're going on him for a while. And you'll notice that Ray of Frost is kind of getting close to coming off cooldown, as well as your Rune of Power is coming off. And so maybe we'll dump an Ebon Bolt into him, and he's about to die right here. And so you precast Blizzard on him, and then you Comet Storm into a Pet Freeze. Oh, it didn't go off. Oh, feels bad. It's Shift 4, not 4. So that would be how you shouldn't do it. You can also cast Frozen Orb into them, and then Blizzard, continue to AoE them. You'd probably run this with Splitting Ice, and it would be Cleaving as well when this comes off cooldown. Then I'll drop my Comet Storm on him again, pretending like this just happened. We got 5 seconds left on Comet Storm. And so what you'll do is you'll cast a Blizzard into a Rune of Power, into a Comet Storm, into a Pet Freeze. And let's see how that... The Blizzards are critting, which is awesome, and your Comet Storm's critting. It's beautiful. So that would be the way to do that, and you want to Blizzard before you Rune of Power. You can even Frozen Orb into a Comet Storm, into a Pet Freeze, and you have so much AoE going out, and right after you come out of that, you're full of Ice Lances from Frozen Orb and Blizzard, and your Frozen Orb is coming off cooldown. And you want to keep your Blizzard up the whole time you're AoEing as well. There's a nice little weak aura here that shows you that, and then above shows you when it's done. So this is how long it's going to be casting for. That's when it comes off cooldown. And so you can know, oh, it's coming off right now, and you cast it, and you almost keep it going constantly. And I'll link my weak auras in the description below for that. And this goes for all of the specs as well in terms of AoEing. You're going to want to keep Blizzard on cooldown and keep your Frozen Orb going. Those are things you can do no matter what spec you're building or you're running. And then you'll want to cleave as well if it's heavy AoE and you're not wanting to run Comet Storm, or you're not wanting to run Ice Nova as well. And another way you can do this is using your Pet Freeze on Blizzard as well is nice. You get 2 instant procs a lot of times, and it'll freeze your blizzard. And so there's that, and another thing you might want to look into running instead of Arctic Gale is Frostbomb, because if you're able to, on a fight like Scorpion, if you're able to keep your Fingers of Frost procs up because you can keep Frozen Orb up because your Blizzard is hitting so many ads and you're trying to pad hard, then you can run Frostbomb and just keep Frostbomb up and spamming Ice Lances into that, and it'll do a ridiculous amount of damage if you have enough ads, or you're doing really big pulls on low level Mythic Plus Keystones. You can do that as well. And so that is, as far as the rotation goes, that's kind of everything I wanted to go over. A couple things that I wanted to go over for each specific build is that, as far as gear-wise, the Glacial Spike build doesn't really benefit as much from the 4-set as well as the other builds do. I mean, it gives you more Fingers of Frost procs from your Frozen Orb, but that's not the essence of the build as it is in your Thermal Void builds. And so it's not as enormous of a deal breaker, I guess. And when you're running Glacial Spike, you're typically not AoEing, so it's not like you're spamming Blizzard and your Frozen Orbs coming off cooldown a lot. Whereas if you're running like a Ray of Frost Comet Storm or your Thermal Void builds, you're going to be assuming you're going to be AoEing more. This has a lot more value. And so a lot of people have gone with item level over tier pieces. Another thing I would suggest, if at all possible, is getting the Helm and Shoulder combos from Court of Stars and Arcway, as it just gives us 3,000 haste every so often, which is amazing for Ray of Frost and Thermal Void builds, not as absolutely necessary for Glacial Spike, specifically because your item levels are going to be hard to get high. And outside of that, I'll have a trinket list below, in the description below, and credits to Binkenstein for that. And some, as far as legendaries go, legendaries that are going to synergize well for Frost. The ones that everyone's going to want to be running, just almost any spec-wise, is going to be Lady Vash's Grasp. I don't know if I'm saying that right. And Magtheridon's Banished Bracers. Never know how to pronounce that. And these two just buff your Ice Lances, or give you more Fingers of Frost, which in turn gives you more Ice Lances, and this increases your damage of them. These are going to be great for all the builds, and they're some of the best in slot ones for Frost. This one's going to be great for Thermal Void builds, and it's going to help extend your Icy Veins, and this is where you start to get a lot of uptime. Outside of that, I wouldn't really recommend Ice Time or Xanasu's Journey for any of the builds. I mean, this is kind of a counterintuitive legendary. When you're AoEing, your Frozen Orb, Blizzard, Comet Storm, Ice Nova, that's what you're kind of rotating through, and that doesn't really give you much time to generate extra flurry procs from Frostbolt. But while you're single targeting and something comes out, then your Blizzard could do a lot of damage. So that might be great for some sporadic AoE encounters. Kill Jaden's is just going to be a great AoE trinket in general. Shard of the Exodar's going to scale the best, or Ray of Frost scales the best with haste, though this will help out your Thermal Void builds in general, but this is going to be one of the better ones for Ray of Frost because it scales so well with Ray of Frost and getting you extra ticks. And Cephas' Secret, everyone hates this, and they get upset because it's not a DPS legendary, but I think it is, and it's great, especially on ads where you can proc this, Interrupt or Pet Freeze or your Frost Nova proxes every 30 seconds. And so if you can line that up with a Heroism, Icy Veins, and you get your 2-set proc and you drop a Ray of Frost, you're going to be doing a ridiculous amount of damage. As well, I wanted to mention when you're running Ray of Frost, the reason you run Shimmer is because you can Ray of Frost, and if worst comes to worst, and you got to move for a mechanic, you can... I thought you could Shimmer and keep it. Maybe they changed that. Check it out. They changed it. Well, scrap that idea. Another good one is just the neck. It really is good for the stats it gives. that much haste and crit really brings you closer to your 33% crit and haste without sacrificing a lot of other stats. And outside of that, I kind of went over most of the legendaries, and the trinkets will be below, artifact path will be below, and there's going to be a sheet. I know Radley, who's another Frost Mage that runs Ray of Frost, which I would recommend checking him out, if he goes over a couple breakpoints that I wanted to go over, and I'll post a thing below about that. And outside of those breakpoints, there's not too much in terms of breakpoints for any of the other builds, but as far as Ray of Frost goes, there's different breakpoints you can hit to get extra ticks in your Ray of Frost. And outside of that, a lot of people ask, should I be Fire, should I be Frost, should I be Arcane, which is the best for Nighthold? To be completely honest, they're all more than viable for Mythic rating. And if you play all of them, and you play them well, you can keep up with anything. A lot of people are worried, oh, I'm not going to AoE good enough, or I'm not going to single target good enough. And if you want to min-max, you should probably play all three specs. Fire's got great AoE. Arcane has good burst AoE, but not as amazing as Fire in all aspects because they cleave better. Arcane's got bad cleave. Frost has great cleave. Their 2-target cleave is better than Fire's, and single target is the best. And Fire single target is bad. So it really, there's no like best answer to that. It's play the spec you want, spec you have left for, and learn how to AoE and single target in your spec, and you should be fine. You shouldn't need to go between each one of them. But if you want to min-max, then you're going to be running Frost for single and 2-target cleave, Fire for stacked, consistent AoE, and Arcane for anything really bursty. I know Arcane does really well on Spellblade, and some things it does well on maybe Gul'dan, that Arcane Explosion can hit all the eyes in Phase 2, so it can hit everything with one ability and do a lot of damage that way. There's all kinds of different things. And for longer fights, Arcane's 4-set is really amazing. You're able to get extra evocations. You can run Fire for Mythic Plus because you have a stun as well. There's a million reasons you can argue for each one of them. So play the one you have Legendaries for, the ones you like, and you should be more than fine in Mythic. Unless you're a top like 100 rating guild and people might want to sit you, and that's a different story. Then to that, I have the answer is still play the one you have Legendaries for. But that's all I wanted to go over. If the guide helped you out in any way or you liked it, if you can like and subscribe to the video, that'd be great. I have links below in the description to a Discord where we discuss about Mage. We typically don't discuss as much about Fire, as my secret hatred of Fire runs deep, but we discuss everything about Mage there, and I frequently do log analysis on my stream, which there's also a link to that as well, and so you can drop logs that you'd like me to look over in there, and I'll get to them as soon as I finish the ones before it. So that would really help me out, help build the community, and we'll see you guys in the next video.